Well, welcome everyone to this webinar series, Peace Talks of the Universal Peace Federation. We have a very important program today with a set of five very distinguished panelists for this conversation during the time of the coronavirus. And our conversation is about challenges and prospects for peace, you could say, in the Middle East and in the Holy Land. It is a critical time. COVID-19 has affected the world, not only a pandemic that affects lives and health of ordinary people throughout the globe, but it's had very, very significant economic consequences that are widely impacting the world, and political consequences that are bringing stress to many governments in terms of their performance, their governance, and stressing those governments economically because it's impacting the citizens. So it is indeed a time of many challenges. And the Middle East, of course, like many other parts of the world, but historically very significant as a place of high drama in terms of the challenges to peace. In the Holy Land, some say the prospects for a two-state solution are off the table. Recently, that there's discussion about further annexation of the West Bank. People are watching not only the recent Israeli elections, but the US election. People are watching the relationship between the US and China. But there are also issues with Yemen and in Libya, an ongoing crisis in Syria. The US has withdrawn from the agreements concerning the nuclear development in Iran, so on. So we have, for this conversation, five panelists. I'd like to begin with our panelist who is from Israel, a good friend of UPF and our Middle East Peace Initiative over many years, Dr. Eldad Pardo. He's a lecturer and research fellow at the Hebrew University, Jerusalem, and head of research with Impact-SC, an Institute for Monitoring Peace in Schools. And he heads two research groups. One is called Iran in Global Perspective, and the other Religious Actors in Conflict Areas. So I'll now give the floor to Dr. Eldad Pardo.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I'm speaking from Jerusalem. We have here the festival of Shavuot, which is Pentecost. This is a very, very nice holiday. It has two meanings. First, we got the Torah, which is the Bible. And also, it's an ancient agricultural festival here in the Holy Land. So this represents both the connection to the land and to the spirits. And if we look at the Bible, here and there we can find the following sentence. And the land had rest for 40 years. This is usually, this sentence, this verse will come usually after a big war, which was the rule. And the exception to the rule would be 40 years between the wars situation. So let's go back 40 years. We are in 2020. So we travel in time to 1980, 1979, 1980. In 1979, actually, we had two major events that still influence us here in the Middle East. The first was, of course, the Khomeini or Shiite revolution in Iran. And the second was the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. So we see that we had here a major change in the Middle East just 40 years back, and this means that maybe we are facing another change. I want to say that those two changes were created by two people. Both of them were mystics. One of them was Anwar Sadat. He would go to his village in Mit Abul Qom, meditate for few weeks. This is what he did. And he got this idea, he must have this peace treaty. And then Ayatollah Khomeini, also mystic, was writing Sufi poetry, whatever. He decided after meditation for years, fasting and all that, that he must organize the entire Islamic world and launch a jihadi war in order to unite humanity under God, according to his view. If we look back at the Middle East in the last 40 years, we see these two voices everywhere and often within the personality of people. One of them argues, if we want to change the world, let's do the jihad of war. Let's change the others. We can help the weak people. We can give money. We can do terrorism. We can put some kind of diplomatic pressure on others, but we will change the others, and then everybody will be happy. And then you have the other voice also across the region saying, no, we need the jihad nafs. We need to look inside. Each of us will change themselves through education, through meditation, through economic work. And gradually, if we do the right thing, maybe others will also join us. So classic bodies that believe in the Khomeini or concept are the Muslim Brethren, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Khomeini's, Palestinian radical nationalism, some elements in Turkey that call for neo-Ottomanism and so on. On the other hand, we have the conservative countries in the Middle East. We have Israel, we have many people among the population of the Middle East, particularly in Turkey, in Iran, in the Arab world. I think the most important thing for us in order to solve the problems of the Middle East is to focus on education. And I would like to also point to two important dates that had tremendous influence on Middle Eastern education. The one was 9/11 in 2001. After 9/11, we heard voices across the region that we need to change the educational systems because there is too much radicalism. They started talking in Jordan and in other countries. In the end of the day, after 20 years, there is a lot of progress, but there is much more to do. The other date I would say is the Arab Spring in 2011. Most people consider it a catastrophe, but I would like to look at the Arab Spring as, okay, I see I'm almost done with the time, so I'll just say about the Arab Spring. Across the Arab Spring, we saw millions of people across the region demonstrating for diplomatic and political changes. And we didn't hear any criticism on any foreign element, not against Israel, not against the West, not against anybody. So the focus was inside. So I will wrap up. If in the questions you want to ask about any educational system across the Middle East that I know of, I will be happy to answer. But I think we need to focus on education. We have behind us generations of bad education, of hate education. We need to focus on good education from now on. Thank you. I appreciate my invitation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pardo. you know, you put a typology there of two mystics with very contrasting approaches to how we can build a better world. If you look at Israel and Palestine today, do you see both types at play? It made me think of Cain and Abel. How do you apply that typology to what's going on currently in Israel, Palestine?
Well, when it comes to education, there is a gap. If you look at the Palestinian education, it's still committed to elimination of Israel, not necessarily through the establishment of a Palestinian state. There are many views there. It can be like establishing an Islamic state or Arab state. Within Israel, of course, there are debates about the details to where will be our borders with the Arab and Islamic world. And we all know about it. To what extent can we trust? To what extent we are to blame for everything? And, you know, all of that. I would say that there is a ray of hope, in my opinion, and this has to do with Israeli Palestinian Arabs. There is a dramatic change. On the one hand, they have a very powerful political party that on the one hand echoes the radical Palestinian narrative, but in reality, they are becoming a very powerful element within Israel, almost in the government, and they are fully committed to democracy, in my opinion. And I see some hope there, because once we have peace, they are going to, in reality, rule Israel. They are going to be the minority that have all the potential, all the education. Just one example: every educated Israeli Arab speaks fluently 3 languages, which are Arabic, English, and Hebrew, while every Israeli speaks only 2. So this is just one example. And of course, as minority, like Avis, we try harder, they try harder, and there are results. So I'm very, very optimistic there.
Well, thank you. And I hope we can come back to some of the very important points you've raised, but I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Daniel Sherman. He's a strategic consultant and lecturer based in Israel. He's a former international relations director at an Israeli human rights organization and has worked on the peace process in the Israeli Defense Forces as a senior general staff officer. He has contributed frequently to UPF programs. Mr. Sherman, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I would like to build on a number of the themes that Eldad introduced, and I think thank you, Eldad, for this excellent introduction to our conversation. First, in discussing or even considering what we mean about peace, and when we talk about peace in the Holy Land, peace within the broader region, and to be honest, I think in our particular historical moment, peace within the world as well, I think it's worthwhile distinguishing between peace as the absence of war, and peace in a liberal sense, which is a sense which it is broadly under attack in this particular moment, which is based more specifically on ideas of human freedom, the promotion of human freedom and of development, and also linking peace with international norms and international institutions. Dr. Pardo discussed the peace treaty with Egypt, which was on the one hand part of a very broad understanding of realpolitik and a vision of how the world could move still during the time of the Cold War, as picked up both by Sadat and then launched forward as well by Kissinger and then Carter, together with Sadat and ultimately Menachem Begin, but leading towards what was at the time and still remains a cold peace, but was a peace in the context of broader international institutions that are now under attack. We have, on the other hand, a sense of peace as being promoted, I believe, by by people like President Trump at this time, as well as I think in this moment by Israel's current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also the other major leaders within the region, which peace is really ultimately an absence of war. So we have the idea of a cold peace as being something that is not of great concern, because we don't think we can actually escape from it. What I would like to do really is look at first of all some of the broader issues that we need to be focused on, as well as a number of recommendations that I have. In terms of the issues, I think it's quite critical while we speak about, and we will frequently discuss peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I believe especially now, and unfortunately to the detriment primarily of the Palestinians, and I think also of Israel, it is impossible to separate any kind of discourse on peace between Israel and the Palestinians and the broader dynamics within the region, which involve the Sunni Shiite split in the Gulf, Russia's re-engagement with the region, and the United States pivot away. So the regional peace is really what we're speaking about. We're in an economic point, again, at this historical moment, which has only been worsened by Corona, where many of the states face significant economic threats. This tremendous push by Saudi Arabia, for example, led by MBS, to engage in a tremendous amount of development to push the Saudi economy away from being an overt reliance solely on oil, and also to bring the Saudi people, as well as the people of the broader region, to a place where the government would be able to manage reforms. There's another question of whether the Saudi government wants to manage broader reforms, because they've only taken baby steps, but that now has been pushed farther back by Corona. There are countries like Iran, which have been hit very tremendously by Corona, and that is coming on top of the maximum pressure that has been put forward by Trump as a campaign to press the Iranian regime to make concessions, both in terms of its political relationship with its neighbors within the Gulf, and also specifically on the Iran deal, on the JCPOA and the nuclear arrangements. So all of these are things that are economically, the region is in a worse situation. We have tremendous leadership challenges in the region. I will just focus very, very quickly on two, really. Specifically, we have a tremendous influence that is going to be played by the American election and the tremendous conflict of what's happening within the United States. That is being reflected within the region on how the United States is pursuing its relations with all the actors, and most specifically with the subject of annexation, which has a tremendous, which can have a tremendous impact. And then within Israel itself specifically, we have a Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who right now is already on trial for crimes, and his own political needs internally is going to tremendously affect how he's going to be acting within the regional issue, and that is of great concern. That continues on to stress on Abbas and Yahya Sinwar within the Palestinian region, and all of the other actors within the region. I'll get very quickly, because I understand my time is quite short right now. But in terms of recommendations, the first is really we need to do as much as possible to avoid miscalculation by any of the leaders in the region. In the region and also outside, I include the United States and Russia, for example, as leaders that should try to avoid miscalculation. Russia so far has been quite careful. The United States, I'm not as certain about. Most of the wars in the United States or within the region have been based to a great extent on miscalculation. The 1967 war was a war that was based on miscalculation and changed the face of the region. Miscalculation now between a triangle involving the United States, Israel, and Iran has the potential to be hugely destabilizing and dangerous to all the peoples of the region. I think the way to do that is by trying to increase predictability, developing better mechanisms for clear communication between the actors, and also enhancing deconfliction mechanisms. We have examples of very good deconfliction mechanisms involving the United States and Russia, and we need to look at how we can possibly enhance that in the future. In the Palestinian arena, I think we need to avoid any kind of major steps around the subject of annexation. This is a much broader topic, so I know that time is short, so I'll leave that there as something that I hope people will refer to. But I also want to note that annexation, there's an issue of annexation, and then what do we mean by annexation? Because some possible plans involving a two-state solution actually also involve land swaps, which is Israeli annexation and Palestinian annexation of Israeli land, Israeli annexation of Palestinian land under an agreement. So it's the idea of moving land around and changing borders is not in and of itself a problem, but the problem is how are we doing it, and are we doing it within a sense that is predictable and in a sense that the peoples of the region believe is leading towards peace and believe in leading towards their best interests. And then one other thing which I think is really quite important is also because there is such a, at least within the Israeli-Palestinian arena, there's such a focus on the question of annexation and whether it will or will not happen in July, and whether it will or not happen at all, and whether it will or not happen within under an umbrella of broad United States support. I think it's quite important to look as well at steps short of annexation. There are a number of steps that can be taken by the current Israeli government and that may be beneficial, especially given, as I mentioned, the leadership challenges that Netanyahu faces, steps that will help advance internal political interests, such as construction within the E1 area of adjacent to Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim, which can have tremendous impact on changing the nature and the whole framing of a possible future Palestinian state with territorial integrity. And I think that's something, or contiguity. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Other things that need to be looked at, steps short of annexation, are things like further moves in Jerusalem, increased Israeli settlement within, or construction within Jerusalem and Jerusalem neighborhoods, redrawing the municipal lines of Jerusalem to keep Palestinian neighborhoods, outlying neighborhoods outside of the municipality, which are again unilateral steps. If taken unilaterally, can be profoundly destabilizing. And then the other issue is the subject of demolitions within Area C, which is an area where, under at least the Trump plan as it's being discussed, about 50% of Area C will be absorbed into Israel. I think there needs the idea of miscalculation with Iran is something that needs to be looked at very carefully, and we need to ensure that Iran, on the one hand, there need to be clear messages from the West to Iran that the aim of overthrowing the current Iranian regime and seeking regime change is not the purpose of current policy, not by the United States and not by Israel. Certainly not for the moment. I think it's going to take a long time before any kind of trust is built up between the sides. And then the other issue is making it very clear what the implications will be should Iran seek to advance its nuclear program beyond certain lines. That is already something that is extraordinarily dangerous. There was a period of time, a grace period, that the JCPOA, the Iran deal, was offered all of the actors. We have now lost that. We need to find some way. The idea of getting back to a new Iran, an improved JCPOA under current circumstances, seems very, very unlikely. But we need to make it clear that any move by Iran to take unilateral steps with respect to nuclear weapons will lead to very severe steps. That should not come as a surprise to anyone.
Then I'm going to, if I can just jump in a minute, if you want to finish that sentence.
Yeah, if I can just say one last thing, and I will, and this is really it'll be 20 seconds, and excuse me for the time. Just the final thing, Eldad, you very beautifully noted the Shavuot holiday that Jews in Israel and Jewish people around the world are celebrating. I usually spend the holiday with a very special family, the Madanis Levi and Hirschfeld family in Kibbutz Nachal Oz, which is a kibbutz along the Gaza border. When I think of what makes it so special is, well, there are a couple of things. One is just they represent for me the possibility of building on quite a difficult and challenging past forward, a new and peaceful and just society. And I think that's actually when we look at possible ways forward, in addition to warnings, which I believe I gave, the possibility of building forward. And Eldad also mentioned the role of the Israeli Arab minority in doing this. there are peoples in the region that are still able and willing and desirous of moving forward, and we need to build on that. Thank you, and excuse me for the time.
Just a quick, thank you for that, Dan. Just a quick follow-up, going back to your typology. Both of you have used a kind of typology in different ways, but yours centered around differing views of peace. One is absence of war, and one is a thicker vision of freedom and buying into the general international norms. How do you see that balance briefly in Israel at this time in terms of the political scene? Is the broader vision of peace that I think you espouse, is that in decline, on the ascendancy? Is it is there an Arab Spring type thing even among young Israelis?
Thank you for that question. I think sadly the picture right now is quite disappointing and depressing. I think where there are areas of hope is exactly where the most shining area of hope is actually exactly what Eldad mentioned, which is that the way that the Israeli Arab population stepped out and, while proudly identifying as both Palestinian and Israelis, are recognizing and demonstrating and acting with their feet that it's possible to move forward towards a better future. They believe in it, and they believe that future can be good for them and good for the broader region. I think overall it has become very difficult for people to discuss peace in the broader liberal sense. That is, it is on the one hand under attack from the Israeli right, or many elements of the Israeli right as it's currently configured. There are many aspects of the Israeli right that actually buy into the idea of norms. The idea of human rights is actually, at least in the US tradition, comes from a right-wing perspective, not a left-wing perspective. But I also think that and then on the other side, the negative trend is there's a tremendous lack of confidence on the part of the Israeli left of what it actually means to move forward towards peace, and whether peace is something that we can find. So there's a desire to maintain the ethical and the practical side of building towards peace. There is a deep questioning of whether liberal ideas are the way forward.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll hopefully have a chance to come back to some of these parts of our conversation. I want to now turn to our third speaker. I would have welcomed Bishop Ria El-Assal. I'm understanding that he has rather significant technical difficulties. We're still hoping that maybe he can join us, but I'll move on to Honorable Gozde Dizdar. She is founding and managing director of Governance and Development based in Turkey, serves as International Vice President for Strategic Partnerships with centrist Asia Pacific Democrats International. She's a member of the board of the International Ecological Safety Evaluation Institute and chairwoman of Youth Committee of the Global Party's Climate and Ecological Alliance. And she has also been a frequent contributor to the programs of Universal Peace Federation. Honorable Gozde Dizdar, who is speaking to us from Turkey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh. But I should really underline that one of the best titles is to be member of UPF family. And during this series of webinars, dedicated work for bringing us hopeful ideas and gatherings. As for our topic today, we all know that Middle East is the world's most controversial region for more than 7 decades. Yet for the past 2 months, it became even more fragile since it is hit by what I call as twin disasters: coronavirus pandemic and historic collapse of global oil prices. On the one side of the coin, there is COVID-19, since it has devastating social, economic, and political crises that leaves deep scars every day. I name it as a postmodern tsunami wave. It shows no discrimination, infecting people regardless of religion, class or wealth, ignoring national borders by its nature. It shows no geographic boundaries, recognizes no national domination, and as we all know, it spread almost all around the world. Following the first case in Wuhan on December 11, 2019, Iran became the region's original epicenter of the coronavirus, with unfortunately very high cases. But recently, 17 Arab countries, Iran and Israel, reported more than 220,000 cases, with more than 9,000 people, unfortunately, losing their lives due to COVID-19. May all of them rest in peace. On the other side of the coin, economies across the region have been hit very hard after oil prices dropped to historical lows last month, owing to a simultaneous supply glut and the diminished demand for oil and gas during worldwide lockdowns. A year ago, the price of oil was $67 a barrel. Last month, prices dropped for the first time below zero in the history. Additionally, producers ran out of storage facilities. Some were forced to pay buyers to take the oil that the firms had no place to keep them. These facts, the combination of COVID-19 and oil price collapse, creates catastrophic impact in the region. Yet, if we have a look at Middle East before COVID-19, what we see is wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the ongoing conflict between Palestine and Israel, the unsolved quarrel on Kashmir, the recent clash of powers between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Additionally, 3 ongoing civil wars lasting 5 years in Yemen, 6 years in Libya, 9 years in Syria, plus months of deadly protests in Iraq, the implosion of Lebanese monetary system, and the 3rd Israeli election in 1 year. We should underline the fact that Syria's war has displaced more than 12 million people, half of its population, both internationally and externally. A total of 6.5 million people have been internally displaced in Iraq and Yemen. In Libya, more than 435,000 people have been displaced. The startling statistics go about 11 people need humanitarian aid in Syria, in Yemen, 25 million in Libya, 2.4 million, and in Iraq, for to say is, the exception of Israel, most Middle Eastern countries don't have medical staff, hospitals, and equipment necessary to provide adequate care during a pandemic, nor the financial resources to bail out their economies. The crisis have set the stage for the Middle East to become, unfortunately, even more fragile. One can roughly see 60% of the region's population, which is under 30 years old, to be something positive, which may impact the number who survived the coronavirus pandemic. But the young people have also spearheaded the region's protests and may now express renewed fury because they will be the generation most impacted by soaring unemployment that can be even worse than Great Depression of 1929 and financial crisis of 2008. From my point of view, these are the facts we should all accept and think, discuss even deeper, because these are the challenges we are facing. Yet, we are strong enough to know that every crisis brings opportunities, and the darkest night has the morning that starts with the lights and sunshine. In Middle East, due to its controversial nature, the biggest investment so far was on guns, defense systems, military expenses. In other words, security was the biggest concern. Building higher walls was the upcoming trend of many years and decades. Yet maybe we should be thankful for COVID-19, which made us understand that none of these wars are high enough to protect even against one small unseen virus, since it threatens the oil-rich billionaire and a refugee in the same way and equally. We are the members of the same family under one God. We are different in many ways, yet we are all equal. Therefore, now it is time to leave ambitions, time to end looking down one another and counting how rich, wealthy people, countries, nations are. Instead of building walls, it's time to build bridges from heart to heart. It's time for empathy, time for peace, and making investment in health, education, and technology. I'm not even mentioning about agriculture. I'm sure we will have time to discuss in the question and answer session. But I'm dreaming that minefields of Middle East one day be the fields of prosperity, peace, and abundance. And we should really remember that none of us is safe until everybody is. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm looking forward to listening to invaluable inputs of the audience and other panelists.
Well, thank you. You portrayed a very sobering and realistic, and I think, unfortunately, largely correct analysis of the challenges. But I think you lifted our spirits with your bright encouragement and call for building bridges through dialogue and hope together. And you pointed to the potential of young people to enter into this equation in a very, very constructive and positive way. Maybe just a word about the economic factor, because I think you drew our attention to the problem of how COVID is impacting, but also the oil decline, and poverty contributes to the challenges we face. And yet there are many great entrepreneurs and business leaders. Do you see hope for greater economic revitalization in the post-COVID and perhaps as we move beyond the current decline in the price of oil?
Dr. Walsh, from my point of view, I always see the bitter truth.
The worst case scenario, but always work for the best. And I think this is more realistic and more ambitious because new sectors, new things will come out. And I think we will catch the spirit of the time. And of course, with more people to people interaction, with more brainstormings and everything, I do strongly believe that we have a chance to build an even brighter, more prosperous future for everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that more encouraging concluding note. Yeah, we did experience some bandwidth problems at certain points, but generally your message came through loud and clear. I hope also for our listeners, there are nearly 300 viewers, and that you're aware of the translation. I hope that's working well into French, Russian, and Arabic. Unfortunately, Bishop Ria El-Assal has not been able to connect, very regretfully. We will miss his intervention, but I'm very, very pleased that Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf is with us, a dear friend and mentor to UPF and its work. He's co-founder and chair of the Cordoba Initiative and founder of the American Society for Muslim Advancement. He's a member of the Council of 100 Leaders on West Islamic Dialogue, World Dialogue. And he served as Imam of the Masjid Al-Farah in New York City from 1983 to 2009. Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for inviting me to another one of your wonderful UPF programs. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. Just as Dr. Prado began by invoking Shavuot, as a Muslim, we've just come out of the month of Ramadan, the fasting month of Ramadan. And for all of us, it has been a unique Ramadan in all of our lives. It is the first time ever in our lives that the three sacred mosques in Mecca, in Medina, and in Jerusalem were shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mm-hmm. And many of us felt that the COVID-19 pandemic was a sign from God. In fact, those of us who are, the word mystics has been mentioned by Dr. Prado. We believe that creation is a book, that is God's book. And so we see signs in everything. And many of us saw in this sign a message from God. It is as if God was telling us Muslims, I really care less about your physical movements. I really feel care less. What I really care is about the connection, the bond between you and me. And many of us felt that, we do something very often in Ramadan called ihtikaf, where we spend a portion of the month, usually the last 10 days or a portion of the last 10 days, in a particular retreat in the mosque, where we even go more deeper into ourselves. And this past month of Ramadan, we felt that the COVID pandemic actually coerced many of us into an involuntary ihtikaf, an involuntary retreat. And in all our spiritual traditions, retreats is how we connect with God. So the sign that many, many people who received this last month, or even during this whole period of COVID-19, is a coerced retreat into ourselves. It is as if God wants us to reconnect back to Him collectively. And we see this in many aspects. We see this in how it has forced many of us to connect via Zoom or technological ways. So the connection is becoming less physical and more non-physical, more emotional, more mental, and more spiritual primarily, because we're primarily spiritual beings. We have heard about how the COVID-19 pandemic has and how the combination of that with technology is perhaps weakening the power of nation states. And many of us have read articles in the papers and journals about the relative weakening of nation states and what the COVID-19 pandemic will do to nation states, and how there's perhaps a greater assertion of people power. I also would like to say something that the biblical prophet Isaiah predicted in a very famous statement, that there will come a time when nations will transform their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning forks. They will not do war anymore. I call this age the age of Isaiah, and I actually believe, and have believed for a while now, that the age of Isaiah has already dawned. It has dawned in many parts of the world. You might, if you call it, the breakout of peace has happened. And to look at the journey that has happened, let us look at Europe, where countries that were at war with each other for the better part of a millennium, and after the two world wars that really devastated a lot of them, those of us who are of my age and our age, Tom, could not believe how countries were at war within our own lifetimes, went from war to peace, to a European common market, to a European common currency, the euro, and to a European Union. And this seems to be the general direction of how things seem to be progressing in this age of Isaiah. Applying this analogy to the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I see the same thing happening. I do not see a two-state solution as being viable. I see that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is becoming more and more a story of emerging towards that. Many people are not aware, even in much of the Arab and Muslim world, that the currency in the West Bank and Gaza is the Israeli shekel. The Israeli military actually monitors the borders not only of Israel, but Israel and what we consider Palestine. The Israeli economy and the Palestinian economy are very, very interdependent. Israeli companies are dependent on a lot of Palestinian labor, and the Palestinian economy is very much dependent upon the Israeli economy. So we see signs here. What it really needs is kind of to go from the looking from the shape from each tree to looking at the shape of the forest. We need a Nelson Mandela figure, either a visionary Israeli prime minister or a visionary Palestinian leader to start working towards a one-state solution, because this is what is happening. The walls are breaking down. People are breaking down. I was approached once more than 10, 15 years ago by a young American Jewish person who had been to Israel and Palestine, and also said there were skateboard teams in Israel who wanted to play with their Palestinian counterparts, and were actually bypassing the barriers to participate and compete with their competitors on the other side of the border. So when you look at these signs, they may be small signs, positive signs perhaps, but they're signs of where the future will lead us to. And as people-to-people interaction increases, I see this future coming. And our work as religious or faith leaders is to not only to connect ourselves to our Creator, to our God, and to our one Lord, but also to be optimists for the future. So I'm very much, as the Honorable Guzda in her very eloquent remarks pointed out, we have a very sober look upon reality. We cannot ignore reality, but we have to work for the best case scenario. I think that the COVID-19 situation, as you pointed out also, Tom, has created stresses upon governments. These stresses and these stress tests will also contribute to not only to the weakening of the nation states, the greater the shift in the balance of power. And even if you look at what happened in the Arab Spring, it was also a shift in the balance of power between the governments and the people. Of course, it's not always a straight line thing, and the curve goes up and down. But the general trend over a period of time, over a period of years and decades, and 40 years may be a long time in terms of our lives, but in the context of history, it's a mere blip of a moment. That within the context of history, I think we can actually look forward to not only bring the dawn of the age of Isaiah, but bringing it to the rest of the world. And this is, I think, where our work and your work of the UPF and the collective work of those of us who are present in this panel and our audience today are committed to, want to see, and that's what most of the world really, really wants to see. The time for conflicts are really, they'll always be with us, but the kind of conflict which has contributed to the kind of suffering that we have seen in the world and continue to see in the world is something which really is an anachronism in a way. It is an expression of our failure. It is an expression of our incapacity. We have the capacity to be better. We have what has been proven by the history of Europe and the United States is that when there is peace between peoples, when there's greater interaction between peoples, when there is greater economic exchange between peoples, people will prosper. And at the end of the day, all human beings are concerned about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness issues. So this is what we need to focus on, and to fan the flames of, and to encourage amongst all of us and all of our participants.
Well, thank you very much indeed for this inspiring message of the age of Isaiah, and that we are moving into a wider fraternity among peoples, and perhaps the Westphalian order of nation states, even though very important for governance and administration. Maybe we can one day achieve that goal of the great prophets and teachers and mystics of throughout the ages. Truly, I hope for that. I think, I know you've worked for years in founding the Cordova Initiative. Maybe would you mind just saying a word about that initiative, just for our viewers, just to briefly hear about that? I just would add that Bishop Ria did finally join, so after that I will introduce him, but a word about that, if you don't mind, sir.
Sure. I founded the Cordova Initiative in the wake of 9/11, because after 9/11, the big question in the United States for sure was this sense of a war or battle between so-called Islam, or the world of Islam, and the West, and the United States in particular. And for those of us who are Western Muslims, who feel both our Western identity very keenly and our Muslim identity equally keenly, we felt it was important to eliminate this so-called tension or gap between the Muslim world and the West. And this was basically the purpose of this initiative. And it was founded as a joint multi-faith initiative to heal this divide by unpacking the contours or the points of the divide, looking at conflicts which have fueled that, such which were a combination of political in nature, such as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the conflict or the presence of, or the attack of the United States on Iraq, which were then seen in the context of West versus the Muslim world. The social component, or sociological component, such as Muslim minorities in Western societies who are not yet fully integrated, many of them recent immigrant societies, to the theological issues which may have contributed to a sense of difference, such as Muslims believing in a so-called Islamic state, whereas the Westerners primarily believe in a secular state, and to unpack the confusions around these issues. So theological, sociological, juristic, if you will, and political, and then to bring about initiatives or to make recommendations to those who are engaged in such work on how to bridge those differences, because it's basically, it's like, turning around a business, so to speak. So you look at all the reasons which contributed to the conflict or the problems, fixing them collectively, and then doing that. Because I'm convinced, as many of us are, that there is no problem that has been conceived or created by or caused by human beings that cannot be equally solved by human beings. There's no such thing as an unresolvable conflict.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
And I thank you, UPF, because you've played a major role in United Peace Federation. You have been a very great, not only a partner, but also a player in agitating for peace, if I might use that expression.
Because you inspired us and you've mentored us so well. So
thank you so much. God bless you, Tom.
Bishop Ria, I believe, is with us.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay.
So if I may, Bishop Ria El Asal is with us. He is the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem and the Middle East from 1998 to 2007. He has been with the World Council of Churches Commission on Human Rights. He has served as co-chair of the World Council for Religious Leaders and co-founder of the Nazareth Democratic Front, member of the Board of Trustees of the Academic Arab College for Education in Israel, Haifa, and author of a book entitled Caught in Between. Maybe we can identify with that concept. Right Reverend Ria Abu El Asal, you have the floor, sir. Welcome.
Good day, my dear panelists, and good day also to all participants here and there in our global village. I want to take this opportunity also to wish those who are celebrating Pentecost according to the Jewish tradition every blessing from Almighty God, and certainly want to wish the Christian community with Sunday, the occasion when we celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit upon the disciples, ever praying that we may be empowered to do that which pleases God and bring harmony and reconciliation in our midst. I'm aware of the fact that the coronavirus pandemic did divert the attention of the world from issues of peace and justice to issues of life and death. And I do appreciate the fact that our attention goes there. And yet, for some people, when life becomes worthless, they'd rather prefer not to continue to live on this planet Earth. The way the question of peace, the cause of peace has been affected, it hasn't been affected by the coronavirus. On the contrary, as I said, people continue to view the coronavirus as but one other problem that faces the human race. As far as the prospects for peace in the Holy Land, and I prefer to speak of it as the land of the Holy One, I'm afraid that it has been shelved for a while, until the government of Israel under Prime Minister Netanyahu moved to further annex different parts of the occupied Palestinian West Bank, which will certainly complicate an already complicated matter. We all know that the root cause of all of this restlessness in the Middle East is the 1967 Israeli occupation of Arab land, where it was for Israel to at least copy the deal that was between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan, with Syria and with the Palestinians. Together we may be able to make of this land of the Holy One a piece of heaven. It's unfortunate that rather than moving towards what would bring peace to the area, the government of Israel under Prime Minister Netanyahu is moving to further annex parts of the West Bank, which will make it impossible for the two-state solution, one for Israel and one for Palestine. It may, in the long run, defeat the very cause for which Israel came forth. In other words, becoming a binational state or moving into some form of an apartheid system, which will be very serious. The annexation itself did not receive the support of all the Israelis. Some people believe that more than 50% of the Israeli citizens are not in favor of more annexation, the way they did annex parts in the Golan Syrian Heights, also Jerusalem. As for Jerusalem, and this is very important for us people of faith, no one with enough common sense would think that the case of Jerusalem can be dismissed, cannot be dismissed. Jerusalem is key to a solution, to a settlement between the Israelis and not only the Palestinians, but also the Arab and the Muslim and the Christian communities in the whole world. And the recent annexation or making Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem, east and west, capital for Israel, did not help people who are seeking to put an end to this conflict. As I said, the root cause is the occupation, and I hope and pray that people of good faith will see to it that Israel will put an end to the further annexation of the West Bank, and instead move to put an end to its occupation and come to terms with the United Nations resolutions, comply with those resolutions, and live and let others simply live. Now, those of us who have been and are still working for peace need be reminded that working for peace does not set aside the search for justice. Albert Einstein used to say that peace is not the absence of war. It is the presence of justice. There can be no peace without justice. For people to continue to speak of a way to peace, in my opinion, we need to convince ourselves and others that peace is the way. And when I say peace is the way, the two communities caught in this conflict for close to 100 years now need to meet again under the auspices of the United Nations, with others, certainly the American administration and the European Union, and religious heads of different faith traditions, to see how best we can stop this deterioration and move towards a peaceful settlement that will bring historic reconciliation between the Arabs and the Jews, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I know this is not an easy case to tackle, but it is left for those courageous, for the brave, to see to it that to believe that we with others we can make it. To continue to be slaves of an agenda in our minds, rather than be open to new possibilities, new options, to bring about this desired peace, this desired reconciliation, will be foolish. Only the wise will continue to review whatever agenda they have, and if they find out that the agenda they have, including the annexation, will not bring a peaceful settlement, they need to put an end to this and step back and go back to what was agreed upon in the Oslo Accord, and try to fulfill and realize the dreams of the two communities by complying, as I said, with United Nations resolutions. Israel is already enjoying independence, freedom, the viable certain state. The Palestinians are certainly not only deserve, but they are entitled to the same right of a state of their own on Palestinian soil, side by side with Israel, with East Jerusalem as their capital, and West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and perhaps the walled city of Jerusalem, which is the most holy part of Jerusalem itself, be governed by a municipal council representative of the three faith traditions, Jewish, Christians, and Muslims, equally represented, so that it will be viewed worldwide as the capital of peace. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share.
I'd like to ask that the panelists all be on gallery mode at this point. We are at the scheduled time of closure. I'm going to ask that we continue for another 10 minutes to at least hear a few of the questions. At this juncture, I'm going to ask Dr. Selig. Dr. Selig, I'd like you to read a few of the questions that can give a sampling of 3 or 4 of the questions that have come in.
Okay.
And I will then turn to the panelists to give, in the context of answering or responding to those questions, kind of their final summation. So let's hear from our representatives of our audience. I see 67 entries in the chat, a lot of them applauding you and your fine interventions. So Bill, I turn to you to give us a sampling of the kinds of questions that have come in.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's such a broad topic, but it's bringing up the question of a common enemy. People are asking, Dr. Sheikh Ramazi is asking, does COVID-19 as this common enemy have the strength to bring Israel and Palestine closer together for the peace talks? Also, Archbishop Mbele from South Africa is asking about the role of the religious and the spiritual community during this time of COVID. Professor Jorge from Brazil is asking about the larger nations. Are they using this pandemic as an excuse to gain advantage over other nations? And then just one last question from Bishop Munib Yunan. He's asking about the Trump peace plan. What do the panelists think of the Trump peace plan?
And I just see a chat from Margaret Ali. Could Dr. Bardo say a little bit about educational reform that might help? But I apologize to the viewers who we couldn't get to all your questions. We've given a sampling. I'm going to invite each speaker, and I think I'll just begin in the order that we started, Dr. Pardo, and then we'll go through the panelists. So it will be any comments. Please feel free to comment to other speakers briefly, to the questions that came, or any final comments you wish to make. Dr. Pardo.
Okay, so I will answer the question about common enemy and the reforms, which is for me one question. When we study education, there is this argument that in order to have a collective identity, in order to cooperate, we need a common enemy. But I challenge this, not myself, but there is definitely a lot of research done, particularly about Jewish history, that one just doesn't need a common enemy. We just don't need an enemy. We can just work together. The second thing about reform, and here I would like to comment also a little bit about what Mrs. Dizdar said, and definitely Imam Abdul Rauf, the relation between Islam and the Middle East. I believe that Islam, I'm also a member of the Israeli Sufi way, and I'm trying to study as much as I can. It doesn't mean that I really know something. Definitely, we should recognize that Islam is the major leading force, spiritual force in the region, and perhaps even it should be a leading force for the entire world. We know that at least in particular periods during the history of Islam, we had freedom of religion. And also there is something very unique in Islam that people are not so much aware, that Islam usually in 99% of cases is not interfering in what's going on inside the private home. So you could be a philosopher, you could be a Sufi, you could be a Christian, you can drink wine, you can do whatever you want. Nobody bothers you. While in the West, that we have on the one hand a lot of openness, but it's also intrusive openness. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both of these things. And there is in Israel a lot of research in recent years, and it turns out that Judaism is basically owes a lot to Islam as much as it gave to Islam. We cannot really speak about Judaism without the impact of Islam. Also, if we go back to Zionism, from the beginning, the idea was not to establish an independent Jewish state, but to establish a state within the Ottoman Empire, paying taxes according to the Islamic Sharia. And this didn't work, but this was the idea. It was the talk was about national home. I want to remind us that when Omar ibn al-Khattab conquered or liberated Jerusalem, the first thing he did was to bring 70 families from Tiberias to Jerusalem, Jewish families. He brought also Jewish families from the Hijaz to Jerusalem. And the idea of some kind of contradiction between a Jewish state or Jewish presence in the Sham, there is a lot of research now that says that Islam really, there were some issues in the Hijaz between Jews and Muslims on all kinds of personal and religious matters, but the idea of a homeland for Jews here is not contradictory to Islam. Well, of course, Islam is an ocean of knowledge and tradition, so you can find everything if you really try.
Looking for it, yeah.
But there is plenty of both spiritual, political, artistic, cultural, whatever you want to see. If you look at Turkish education, for example, you see that
this will be we'll wrap it up with this.
Okay, Turkish education. You look at Jerusalem in Turkish education. They say clearly that the Jews are a nation. That Jerusalem is the holiest place for the Jews, and Jerusalem is also holy for Muslims and for Christians, which is basically what everybody says in Israel. So I think there is we need to change a little bit the frequency and speak more calmly, more softly. There are no real contradictions for things. If you look, for example, I studied the ultra-Orthodox school textbooks in Israel, and they say that the Jews of Mecca were really rude to the Prophet, and this is not nice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pardo. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Sherman?
Sure.
The Jews of Medina, sorry.
I will try to, as in my previous talk, to build on your very profoundly interesting and inspiring thoughts. I think it is important to look at the nature of contradiction and also where there are convergences. I think the idea that we can find ways of living together and of being together and of finding a mixing that is actually much more productive and effective than this search sometimes for enemies as a way of mobilizing support and then moving forward. One of the things that is most dangerous and in our current moment, I think really is the manner by which we see populism. A popular power is essentially good. That's what it came through with in all of the speakers, the idea that that people have an ability to, as individuals and together, and making use of faith and ideology to do extraordinarily creative and good things. And that's what I'm taking away as profoundly inspiring from our time together today. But at the same time, we also see around us leaders that are mobilizing, very frequently mobilizing against, whether it's against Iranians mobilizing against dangerous Shiites mobilizing against Sunnis, whether it's the United States mobilizing against a dangerous world in many ways, and without minimizing or dismissing the idea that there are dangers that we must protect ourselves from. It is important to recognize that the ultimately, and here I'm referring back really to Rousseau, and who is I think one of the central thinkers of the liberal tradition, who believe that the only victories that we ever achieve are creative victories, where we produce or somehow create more than those around us. And in so doing, we're inspiring those around us also to create. We all must bring each other up and bring each other forward. And then one last piece I think that I'd like to touch on really is the idea, again, where I'm no expert in the Manichaean tradition as it relates to our region, but it's certainly profoundly influenced early Christianity, and also is something that is this sense of a black and white, a sense of good versus evil that we so clearly see. And we must find ways of both of working together and overcoming this idea that any single group amongst us has direct access not to God or to goodness, but that we have an obligation to seek ways of sitting around the same table and working together to move forward. And I think that's really ultimately the way we're going to find our way forward. Just and to make, this was a very high point, but to connect it to the idea of I obviously don't have time to look at the Trump peace plan or the political process, but a two-state solution is only a solution in as much as the end of World War II ended in a certain treaty that kept the states separated, and we understood where borders were. As you see, there's a constant ongoing evolution, and that evolution can move in many different ways. And by finding convergences between those people who say two states, those people who are now saying one state, we can perhaps build on a tradition that we all have together and came through again clearly in our talks of living together and of seeking peace. And again, Dr. Walsh, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel Sherman. Honorable Gozde Dizdar.
Dr. Walsh, to answer your question in a very simple and short way, I want to give some examples. The worst natural disasters in the world that I remember myself starts from Haiti earthquake, 2010, Hurricane Katrina, 2005, and then I remember 2008 China earthquake. And even continuing with earthquakes, I remember the Yalova earthquake in Turkey, where unfortunately 18,000 people lost their lives. And as for Yalova earthquake, do you remember that the first pioneers who came and helped us was from Japan and Korea? And we never questioned who came in the times of crisis, who came and helped us. We never questioned the hand with their ethnicity, nation, and religion. So coming back to point, this COVID-19, I think, as I try to explain also in my presentation, should teach us once more again that we are all different, religion, ethnicity, even political, like in one family, the brother and sister can have different political approaches. But I think the key of solving all these problems, moving and progressing, is dialogue. So I think the future of Israel and Palestine, the future of Libya, Iraq, because there were some questions, should be decided by the individuals, but with discussions and, as I said, people-to-people dialogue. That's why I find this floor and this dedicated work of UPF very valuable. And I do believe that we can really build up a better future with sharing more about thoughts and ideas. Once more, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed. And our final intervention from Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone's comments. Dr. Pado's comments on the relationship between Islam and Judaism were very, very well received and deeply profound. And this is important to realize. The fact is, in all our faith traditions, we are taught that God created us from a breath, from His breath, and we're created in His image. So if we truly believe that we're created from God's image, that what our fundamental definition of our species, the definition of what needs to be human, is that we're really images of God walking on earth. And if we prioritize that, then we look at, instead of looking at Islam, Judaism, and Christianity as Moses incorporated, Jesus incorporated, Muhammad incorporated, we really have to shift to saying it's all about a God incorporated with Muhammad, Jesus, and Moses as regional managers in space and time. And this is the message not only of the Bible, it's also the message of the Quran, that it's all about God and our relationship with God, and rebooting and recalibrating ourselves in terms of God. And as God tells us in the Quran, we created from one male and one female and made you into a variety of nations and tribes so you would celebrate your diversity. And you get to know each other as such. And and we celebrate it right now. Do we want to eat Korean? Do we want to eat Chinese? Do we want to eat Italian? We celebrate in our cuisines. We celebrate it in many of the things we do. Do you want to listen to an Italian opera? Do you want to listen to a traditional, rock piece of music or classical music? There's so much to celebrate in our diversity. And this is what the voice of the faith leaders are supposed to do, is to bring about this optimism to help recalibrate human beings. And this is my plea as well as my complaint, is that the religious voices are not strong enough or that particular unifying voice. I, for example, would like to see Israel see itself analogously to Saudi Arabia as since the 1980s, Saudi Arabia called itself custodians of the two holy sites, because it is responsible for the holy site in Mecca and Medina. Well, the third holy site is in Jerusalem. So I'd like to see Israel regard itself as the custodian of this site, although I know it's under the authority of the Jordanian authorities, but still it controls it. Not in the sense of custodian in the official sense necessarily, but the fact that we are all participants in this. We are all, we have to ensure the access, the safety, the ability of people to override this divisive partisanship which has been destroying all of us. There was, before the rise of Iran and the Shia Sunni thing, the conflict between Shias and Sunnis were not as partisan as they have become since then. So we need to kind of go back to the future, so to speak, or make the future be more representative of the past in terms of the best aspects of our past, but build the future which is even better and brighter and more prosperous, where we not only survive and have peace, but we thrive together. I would like to see this voice be more present in political institutions like the United Nations, like all these other institutions. The voice of a unifying religious voice is what is required today. And if anything that the COVID-19 pandemic has been is a collective tap on our shoulder to actually move in that direction. We are one people, we are one humanity under one God.
Oh, well, what a fitting conclusion. I mean, this truly has been a conversation, constructive, civil, and I must say inspirational as well as realistic. So I applaud all of you. I couldn't say enough about how much I've been encouraged and inspired and edified by the panelists today, and I think our viewers as well, over 250, and we'll be sending out the recording of this on YouTube, and it will be made available in wider platforms. So thank you. We'll adjourn now. Once again, sorry that we went over time, but I couldn't cut off these great speakers. So thank you all, and let's build a world of lasting peace together. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye
Thank
to
you
all
very
of you.
much.